Welcome to The Spiritual Life. I'm Father Jim Martin. On this podcast, we reflect on how people experience God in their prayer and in their daily lives. And I am joined by my wonderful producer, Maggie Van Dorn. Maggie, good to be with you.
It's good to be with you, Jim. And we have such an exciting guest lined up today. Quite possibly the most famous nun in cinema, actually.
Although, do you think Julie Andrews and Audrey Hepburn would agree?
How to solve a question or a problem like Maria?
Very good. And then Audrey Hepburn in the nun story. But I think for most people of maybe your generation and, people born in the last 30 years, yes, definitely the most famous nun in cinema history. Of course, we are talking about Whoopi Goldberg. We are so happy to have her today.
Whoopi Goldberg is one of these guests who really does not need an introduction, but we're going to do it anyways because she is a multi-award-winning actress, one of only 20 entertainers who has achieved EGOT status.
That is Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony, for those not in the know.
Very versatile performer. Whoopi got her start in the 1985 film The Color Purple, and then went on to become the second African-American woman to win an Oscar for Best Supporting Actress for her role in Ghost. Her role in Sister Act and Sister Act 2 is, of course, iconic for Catholics. And these days, Whoopi has set a new record, co-hosting The View for 18 consecutive seasons. That's more than any other host, including its founder, Barbara Walters. So, Jim, how did you meet the famous Whoopi Goldberg?
Well, I knew of her, and actually even before she was in film, this is stretching people's memory, she was a great kind of stand-up comic and just wonderful performer. So I knew her through that. And I met her briefly on a show with Neil deGrasse Tyson, the astronomer and scientist. And then it wasn't until this Vatican sort of audience for comedians that I really got to know her and, chat with her. And she's just wonderful. She's just so much fun. And one of the things I didn't know about her was that she was raised Catholic. And we talk a little bit about that on the podcast. But she's great. She's just a lot of fun and every bit as much fun as you would hope.
Now, this Vatican gathering of comedians, it took place last year in 2024, right? And it was over 100 comedians from around the world. Is that right?
Yeah. Long story short, the Vatican's Dicastery for Culture and Education reached out to me and said, would you help us put together this kind of audience, basically, with Pope Francis. He wanted to sort of welcome comedians and comics and humorists. And so they asked me to help with the American side of things. And it was a lot of fun. We had, I think, something like 12 or 15 Americans, Stephen Colbert, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Chris Rock. You can look it up online. And Whoopi was one of them that we ended up picking. And I had forgotten, and she reminds me in this podcast that she had actually met the Pope before.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And we're talking about Pope Francis, just to be
correct.
Clear, too, that this is all, this conversation with Whoopi was recorded just before the death of Pope Francis and the election of Pope Leo.
Yep. So it was neat to see Francis and Whoopi together. It was a really fun day.
Great. Well, we'll get to that conversation with Whoopi in just a minute. But first, we're going to turn to a question from our audience. And again, this is the part of our show where we take a question from you, our listener, and it can be a question of spirituality or prayer, somewhere that you might be struggling in your life. And Jim offers some spiritual advice. So this question comes from Luis, who is concerned that spirituality has become a sort of catch-all word. And he writes that some people say that they respect my faith and I should respect their spirituality. But many times their arguments are used to discredit or criticize my Christian beliefs. In their view, my beliefs are old-fashioned and they want me to keep my faith to myself. What should I do?
Well, thanks, Luis. That's a really important question. And I think you're right. I think spirituality is becoming more and more imprecise. When people say I'm spiritual, I mean, you want to take them, sort of give them the benefit of the doubt, but you want to say, well, which spirit? Like, what are you talking about? Is it the Holy Spirit? Are you talking about God? What is it? And then, of course, a lot of people today say that they're spiritual but not religious, right? SBNR, it's sometimes abbreviated
I've never heard the acronym.
Yeah, that was back in like the 90s. And one of the problems with that is that if you're not connected to a religion, and certainly this, I'm not trying to cast aspersions to people who aren't religious, but religion, as one person once said, helps us to connect and correct. So if you're not in a religion and a religious organization, right? You're not connected to people as much, right? We're all naturally social animals. We want to worship together, and it's natural to kind of want to gather together. There's a reason why Jesus chose, 12 disciples instead of just one. So you kind of lose that connection. And then also, which is hard for people to hear, you lose the opportunity to be corrected. So for example, if you say, oh, I'm spiritual but not religious, and it's just me and God, and I read the Gospels and I say, I don't really need to take care of the poor, right? I don't have to bother with the poor, right? Well, your religious tradition will correct you on that, right? And the Christian tradition will say, and your church will say, no, you really do have to take care of the poor. So I think that connect and correct is really important. Now, the last part of the question about what happens if people criticize my views and think that I'm old-fashioned and they want me to keep your faith to yourself. I think it's basically just talking about your experience and saying, look, this is how I experience the world. This is how I experience God, and to live out your faith the best you can. And, if people have a problem with that, I mean, you can say that's kind of their problem, right? I mean, if you're living out your faith and being loving and charitable and merciful, right? That's the most important thing about Christianity, I would say. Then I think you should be at peace.
I think it's really easy to get baited into a religious argument about whose faith is right or wrong. And I much prefer your approach, Jim, of just grounding yourself in your own faith tradition and speaking from that experience rather than openly confronting someone else for their beliefs.
Yeah, and those conversations tend to go nowhere pretty fast. But anyway, thanks, Louise, for that great question. We appreciate you writing in.
Yeah, thanks, Luis. And if anyone would like to ask Father Jim a question, you can write to us at thespirituallife@americamedia.org.
And now, a word from one of our sponsors. Looking for a simple way to deepen your own spiritual life? Give Us This Day is a great resource that helps Catholics stay rooted in Scripture and in prayer wherever you are, no matter how busy you are. It features both reliable and relatable spiritual reflections and prayers to accompany you throughout the day. And I'm really honored to be an editorial advisor. I've been one since the very beginning, and I write a monthly essay called Teach Us to Pray about prayer, and I use Give Us This Day every single day. It's a great resource. And here's a great offer right now. Listeners of The Spiritual Life can get 10% off their new print subscription. Just visit giveusthisday.org/spirituallife and join this community of Catholics praying together. Again, that's giveusthisday.org/spirituallife. And now on to our conversation with Whoopi Goldberg. Well, Whoopi Goldberg, we are so happy to have you. Thank you for joining us.
I'm thrilled to be here. I really like talking to you. So
thanks. Well, the feeling is mutual. Whoopi, we met, I would say, in earnest last year at the Vatican, and I wanted to start off, by saying I'm sure you receive invitations all the time. What was it like to get this invitation from Pope Francis?
Well, it turned out it was the second time for me because I had just met him several months earlier. And it was amazing because I really felt compelled to speak to him because there was a couple things I wanted him to know and that I thought I needed him to do. And that sounds really odd, but what I mean is, one of the things that I needed to see, because I have a great friend called Father Aiden, who's in Oakland. He runs St. Columba Church there. And most of his parishioners are Black. And they don't feel connected to the Catholic Church. And that bothered me because, at one point they'd been on him about having all these, stained glass windows of, Black saints that only we know about, apparently. Apparently the church didn't know about them. I just wanted him to say, listen, hey, American Black Catholics, you're in my prayers also. I'm thinking of you because we haven't always done right by you as a people. So just want you to know you're in my heart, you're in my presence. So I wanted to tell him that.
What was his response when you brought all this up?
Well, I was so kind of stunned that he didn't turn me down to come and see it, that I forgot half of it. But it was really wonderful to be in his presence, because he was my first actual Pope right in front of you, not in a car passing. Because the last one I saw was John the 23rd when I was a kid.
Wow.
Yeah. And, I've had a very interesting journey with the church. So I missed several of the other popes because I wasn't sure that they understood what we were up against just as human beings here. So I didn't really pay much attention to them. And then I had all these things in my head about, just trying to understand why you wouldn't support a pope who sounded, to me at least, like he was speaking the words of Jesus, the things I remember, and how anybody could say, no, you're not representing. I mean, I think God's okay because God knows all of this. He already know, the book is already written. We already know he knows. We don't know, but God knows. And so all of this anti-divorce person, anti-gay people, it was like, but wait a minute, God already knew this was happening. Maybe, and I think I said this to you, but maybe I hadn't worked it out yet. But I realize in my mind, I've come to the belief that the test is not for divorced people or gay people or people who think differently. The test is for us and how we treat people, how we stand up for people who don't stand up or can't stand up for themselves, what we do. Once in my mind that was okay, that was okay to think that way, I started to feel a lot better about the church.
Yeah, that's a great insight. You did not say that to me because I would have remembered it. That's a great way of looking at it, that the onus is on us to reach out to people who feel like they're on the margins. One of the things that surprised me, as I've told you, I've always been a huge fan since way, way, way back when. I was actually, and a little embarrassed to tell you this when we met for lunch that one day, I didn't know much about your Catholic upbringing.
Well, I never talk about it.
Yeah, can you talk about it now?
I can.
Yeah, what can you just give fill in the gaps for people, like how you were brought up and your schooling and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. I went to St. Columba on 26th Street and between 8th and 9th in Manhattan. That's the schooling that I had. I went to the 8th grade and then really decided it was not for me and never went back. But I grew up believing everything that John the 23rd said, because he was talking to me. He was saying, listen, we need you to make music. We need you to do psalms. People don't really want to know so much from the Latin because they want to hear they want to hear what you have to say in their language. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. That's right. And then he's like, and all you wonderful nuns, you need to be in stuff that doesn't scare people. That's basically what he was saying. It's way hot in everything you have on. Just let's lighten it up. Let's bring people back to the church because that's what we do. And so that's what I always thought the church was and was supposed to be. And, the thing as a kid you don't really realize is that the church is made up of human beings. And like all of us, some of them are flawed, and I think I just, you were hearing so many things and I was just really mad because it's like, if you come out and you say, listen, we know we are chock full of flaws. We know this. So let us get ourselves together and you can help us by moving us forward in your forgiveness. Because some of the things that we need to be forgiven for are huge. Huge. That's what I needed to hear somebody say, and that wasn't what I was hearing. I was just hearing, if you get divorced, you can't take the host, or if you've had an abortion, we don't care what's happened in your life, you're out. And to me, that just seemed wrong, because yes, there are 10 commandments. Not one of them deals with gay people. Not one of them says, listen, if you find yourself in a bad situation, you're on your own. God says, come to me. Come to me. So why would I listen to anybody else when God already told me I'm the only one you need? I'm the only one you need to talk to. So I listened to all of these priests and grown-ups kind of unwittingly maybe push people like me away, because I'm not perfect, but I believe that JC said really important stuff, and that's why we have confession, to go and say, listen, I didn't make it as to the goal line that I wanted to make it to, but I will be back.
Yeah, no, that's, it's funny. In Old Testament studies, we learned that sin in the Old Testament, which I love, is called missing the mark. That's actually, so that's a great image. I was just writing a homily about Peter, and, the church has always been full of sinful people, right? I mean, from the very, very beginning, Peter denies knowing Jesus, Judas betrays him, the disciples argue about who's the best, and so it's kind of from the beginning. But now I'm curious, so where are you now with your faith and Catholicism and all that? Where how would you describe yourself?
I think I describe myself as a lover of God. I don't know if that makes me a Christian or a Catholic. I don't know the difference. And so I'm just, me and God, we're good. And I think I told you I have a dear friend called Jonathan Rumi who plays Jesus in The Chosen. So from time to time, I say, what is happening? We have great conversations. And his this show, as a matter of fact, had a huge impact on me, because it felt like there were, over the last, since how long has Pope Francis been in?
Oh gosh, 12, 13 years, I think.
Okay,
yeah.
So just as he was coming in, I was starting to feel like God was tapping me on the shoulder, and I kept moving his hand, moving the hand, saying, I'm not speaking to you. I don't want to talk to you. And God was like, what did I do? And I was like, well, why can't we figure out what's going on, and why is this so difficult, and what has happened? And God said, has it ever been all that easy? What? I was like, well, no, but he said, well, just, I'm not saying you need to come now, but I'm calling you. Okay, you call me, but you know what I am? I'm a heathen. I'm a sinner. You know who I am, Lord. And Lord said, yeah, I know.
No, but let me ask you a question for some of our listeners, because I think they might be sort of wondering. When you say that you felt God kind of calling you or inviting you, what does that mean? Like, does that mean in your prayer, or just kind of in your things that are happening in your life, or?
Just things in life. I mean, I had to look up how to say the Our Father again. I mean, it's been a long time. It really had to do with just things started happening, just weird stuff that didn't make sense individually. And then a friend of mine, one of the guys that works on the show, said to me, have you seen this TV show? The Chosen? I was like, no, I haven't. He said, I think you might like it, because you went to Catholic school. He says, this is going to change how you look at things. And I was like, okay. And then 3 weeks, a month went by, and it happened that I was at home, and I thought, well, okay, let me watch it. Let me see what's there. And oh my goodness. It was, first of all, this is what I assumed Jesus would look like.
Sure.
It's like, oh, hello. And he laughed. And I thought, okay, something's up here. Something's going on. Jesus is laughing. He's telling jokes. You know, he's got a sense of humor. And look at Mary. And look at the other Mary. Oh, my God, look at you guys. And I went in and I thought, this is extraordinary. This is amazing. And okay, so I got the call. I hear you. And so I wrote a letter to Jonathan. I said, I don't know who you are. I don't know what you're doing, but this is extraordinary. And I just have to tell you, because I don't generally pay any attention to these kind of things because they never include me. So I never feel like I'm there. And I don't mean include me as an actor. I mean, include me just visually. He wrote me back and then I had to add, and yes, it's me.
Right.
And so we became friends, and then I saw their Christmas episode, and people looked like people. People looked like people from my neighborhood. People looked like people from New York. I mean, it was filled with humanity, and it was the first time ever that I felt, oh, whew, we are there. We are here. We're all part of this. And that's what sort of got me in the mode to write and say it, because I'd written to Pope Francis because I had that experience with Father Aiden. Now, my brother was devout. He used to go to church every day. I would say, what, every day? And he'd say, yeah, sis, every day. And he would, you know, we were wild and weird, and he went to church every day and I didn't, you know, but he was a good guy. And then he passed, and that was his church. So I got to meet them. And then I had this whole conversation about, you know, Black Catholics. And then I wanted to meet Pope Francis. And then this, one of the guys that works on the show said, I think you should see this show. And it made it make sense to me, which enabled me to write to this guy and say, I'm in search, I don't know of what, but I think I'm supposed to be doing this. So that's been the path.
So a kind of confluence of different things that happened. And I agree. I think that show is extraordinary. And I think that it shows, as you were saying, Whoopi, not only the humanity of Jesus, but that these people were real people who had lives and they had backstories and they had experiences. And I think we tend to see them as just these sort of characters in a, you know, like a comic book almost.
Yeah.
And it really does, it really does flesh them out. It's wonderful. So this is, I would say, this kind of, you might say, coming back to the church. Is it fairly recent, or was it kind of like sort of percolating all along?
I think it's fairly recent. I'm not good with any kind of organization. I'm just not good with it. I'm not good with organizations I work for, organizations I go and do, you know, because I feel like people will always try to get you to forget that God's everywhere, and you can talk to God anytime, any place you are. So I am in that habit, and I suspect that I'd been talking to God the whole time, and God was just letting me go until he was ready for me to wake up.
That's kind of beautiful, kind of sort of when you were ready.
Yeah.
Yeah, that God kind of pulls you back.
Yeah.
So when you talk about talking to God, what's your prayer like? What would you say your prayer is like?
Erratic. That's what my
Did you say sporadic?
It's erratic.
Oh, erratic.
Yes.
Okay.
Because
what does that mean?
Well, it means like I pray twice a day. I have the prayers I remember, and I do them. And then I start sort of trying to remember all the people I want to pray for and all the things I want to pray for. And sometimes I get so caught up, I just say, okay, Lord, you know what I'm thinking. I can't. I'm done. I can't anymore. And I know I'm okay because I know God does know what I'm thinking.
Sure.
So I'm not afraid of it. But I try not to forget to do in the morning and in the evening.
So you're very faithful then to your, I mean, even though you say erratic, that's pretty faithful if you're.
Well, I'm trying, you know.
Whoopi, I want to go back to something that you said earlier, and make sure I kind of have the timeline straight. I think you had mentioned that you really started to get this calling from God, and it was kind of at the start of Francis's pontificate, would you say, like around
Yeah, I
2013,
think when I
that
started
time?
to hear it, I'm
Yeah.
sure, God's like, Whoopi!
Yeah. And 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 was that not also the time around that period that you lost your mom and then a couple years later your brother?
Well, I lost my mom and I understood it. I had no problem because she raised us to stand on our own. My brother was her first child. And so for him, her loss was even larger than my own. And because he was a spiritual being, when I went up to close out their house, his house, because they lived on the same property. And so I went up to close his house out because he was supposed to close her house out. He didn't. So I went up and I was doing both, but I ended up going to see Father Aiden was my brother's spiritual, not pastor, he was the priest. He was my brother's priest.
Pastor.
And he loved his church and he loved his, all the people that went to church. He really loved them. And as I said, I always was sort of teasing him, saying, you go really every day? You don't miss a day? He didn't miss a day. Father Aiden said, no, he was here every day. Losing him, I think, started the road.
Well, let me ask you, did that affect your understanding of God? Was there anger at God or anger at Jesus, particularly at your brother's death? Or
No, I was angry. I tell you, I was angry at the doctors because if a doctor had said to my brother and I, listen, aneurysms run in the family because your mom died of an aneurysm, go and get yourselves checked. He wouldn't have. And then I would have been mad at him. But no, I don't get mad at God about stuff like that. I get annoyed when I sometimes forget that there are things that you have to go through in order to learn. Right. And sometimes that's what God makes you do. I pray and pray and pray and pray and pray and pray and pray really hard to get a different outcome for
Sure, of course.
And it didn't happen. And I was like, oh, okay. But then I remembered, not in your time, in my time. When it's time, I'll fix it. But you need to see, you need to know this. You need to go through, you need to feel this to understand. People need to know what this feels like. Because, if you lose your empathy for what happens to people, you're lost.
That's really interesting. People need to know what this feels like. So people need to know what loss and grief feels like. Is that what you mean?
Loss and grief, they need to know what not being able to guarantee that you can feed your family feels like. They need to know what it's like to be discounted for the color of your skin or your sex, or the fact that you think differently than other people, that you don't, what happens when people start saying, no, if you don't do it my way, I'm going to do this to you. And we needed to know what this feels like. And we're learning.
Now, do you ever get I'm just curious, do people in the entertainment industry know that you're a believer, you're a Christian, and do you ever get any flack for it?
No, most of the time people are really annoyed at me.
Because
they're like, no, you can't be. You can't believe what you believe and love God. It's like, I'm sorry. God knows all about me. God's already up to par, up to speed with what I am and who I am and why I am. So I have no fear of that. I have fear of my own sin when I'm a nasty person for no reason, or when I am fake for no reason, or when I cuss up a storm for no reason, when I'm not as good a person as I could be. That's the stuff that worries me.
So here's a question. Because I'm curious about this myself, when you feel that you're in these situations and you're not the person you should be, and you're kind of grumpy or whatever. So what do you do about that? What's your kind of technique?
Well, it depends on when I figure it out. There's some days I don't realize that I've been a bonehead. And then somehow the message comes like, it's kind of like my mom and my brother and God all gang up on me and go, hey, you weren't very nice today.
Yeah.
Who were you today? So I hear them.
Yeah, I didn't experience yesterday. Maggie knows this. I was in a terrible mood just for a number of reasons. And I remember someone saying to me, okay, life presents you with these things, these situations, and things might not be going your way, but you don't have to be a jerk. You have a choice. I told a friend once, I think you'll like this, a very good friend of mine. I was teasing him, and I said very sort of mock seriously, I said, my life is such a cross, Chris. My life is such a cross. And he said, yeah, but for you or for others? So you don't want to make your life be a cross for others.
Yeah.
I'm dying to ask you, one of my favorite movies of many of your movies is, I'm sure every Catholic tells you, the Sister Act.
Yes.
And I'm really curious. So it's about Catholic sisters. Were there Catholic sisters at St. Columba's, and did you know Catholic sisters?
Oh, yeah.
And do you know Catholic sisters?
Yeah.
And can you talk about that?
One of my favorite people just passed last year. She had been my teacher at St. Columba. And I was as close to being her in the movie.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. And I wrote her. Her name was Sister Jean Fielder. And she was great. She was like 3 feet tall and just would beat you over the head with a baseball bat if you pissed her off. She took no prisoners. She was great. And she was always honest. And so I ran into her. I was performing at some school, and a guy got up and said, so my teacher said that she knew you when you were little and blah, 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 blah. And I said, she might have. What's her name? And he said, Sister Jean Fielder. I said, yes, where is she? And that's how I found her.
Wow.
So so I could call her and talk to her about stuff and ask her if I was going off on the deep end.
So was she was really that kind of lively as the character you played? Wow.
Maybe not as lively.
Right, yeah.
You embellished a bit.
As lively, but she was close. I made her as close to the woman that she was in my mind.
And so what appealed to you? Was it that no-nonsense attitude or the joy, or what drew you to her?
She just really wanted to have a good time and wanted you to have a good time too. She wanted you to know that there's nothing wrong with laughing and dancing and acting the fool, because God's okay with that. And she probably has a big part of why that flame didn't just go out. Why that flame just was like maybe that big as I was coming through my life as a grown-up. But it was like a little old flame on the gas stove.
Well, and that in a sense, that connects to your experience with The Chosen, where you see Jesus who's laughing. And, Jesus, as I always point out, Jesus' first miracle was to make more alcohol at a party.
Hello.
Right? And he talks about joy, he talks about the wedding banquet, and we have this idea of Jesus as being so dour, but he was human, so he laughed. And that's a great story about that sister. I'm always curious. You must, or maybe you don't, but you must have many sisters coming up to you and saying
all the time.
Yeah.
We sing the music. We do all this stuff. Come and see us. Come and sit. There's a wonderful sister who had been in an Elvis movie. Do you know?
Oh, sure. Dolores Hart.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And so I went to see Sister Dolores in her later years. And she said, I said to her, do you ever miss it? She said, all the time. I said, well, why did she said, because I would miss this more. I would miss this more. She said, this was like nothing I was ever prepared for. But when I got she said, when that phone rang and I picked it up and it was Jesus on the line, I was like, okay, I get it.
Did you ever think when you were younger, did you ever think about becoming a nun, looking at all these sisters? And
Yeah. But I knew I couldn't live with them.
there's a Jesuit saint named St. John Berkman's, and one of his most famous lines, which I love, life in community is my greatest penance. And Cardinal Dulles said, well, I wonder what the community thought about him.
See, if we could feel more of that, I think more people would come to us. I've had to take a good look at some of the edicts that I've laid down in my own head. And I know there are wonderful priests like you. You are a big, oh, yeah, okay, that's right. I forgot. I forgot. And so in talking to you that day, it just reiterated to me that I'm on this path. And then, to read about you and know what you do for people just knocked me out. So
Well, thanks. That's very kind. I mean, because it's funny to hear that because I've been a fan for so long. So it's lovely to hear that.
And I pray for you every day, actually.
Thanks.
Because you do that thing that I love, which is you let people know who everyone else is telling God doesn't love you. You are the one that says, actually, God does. So go on. So I pray for you every day in my erratic prayers.
That is very kind. Thank you. That's very sweet. And I will take any prayers that I can get. Erratic, sporadic, permanent. Listen, Whoopi Goldberg, thank you so much for all you do, for all you are. Thanks for all the joy you bring people. Thanks for the joy you bring our listeners. And thanks for being a guest on The Spiritual Life and sharing some of your spiritual life with us.
Well, thanks for asking me. It was a gas to get the invitation, so thank you for that.
That's right. First the Pope and then us.
Can't go wrong there.
Thanks so much. Well, that was pretty amazing.
It really was. She opened up and shared so much, more than I was anticipating. What were some of the standout moments for you?
I thought her whole experience, which is very common, of the journey and also feeling those tugs from God. That's one of the reasons I asked her, because I think a lot of listeners are curious about what does it mean to feel like that invitation from God? Does it mean you see obviously a vision or you hear something? But as she was saying, usually it's a situation of coincidences and noticing things, and when her brother died and her mother died, and then the entrance of the chosen into her life, and all these things kind of, in a sense, conspire to pull her towards God, which I thought was really beautiful, because I think, again, a lot of people struggle with that. Like, what does it mean to feel this call back to the church? The other thing which I thought was very evident was her love for the humanity of Jesus and how the chosen represented that. And for so many people, particularly Catholics, that's a kind of aha moment. I mean, we all know Jesus was fully human, fully divine. But when you see stories like The Chosen or earlier, Jesus of Nazareth, or any of those movies, even The Passion of the Christ, you realize, boy, this was a human being, and it can be really revelatory for people, and it comes in different ways. I think The Chosen has been a way for a lot of people to really fundamentally see that he is fully divine, he's the Son of God, and he is a human being who, as Whoopi Goldberg says, laughs.
Right.
What about you? What'd you take away from all of it?
Well, on that same note, I mean, The Chosen has given flesh to these characters that we are well acquainted with in Scripture, but it made me think about representation, how important that is, not only in Hollywood and entertainment, but in our churches and stained glass windows. And it seemed to kind of come full circle for Whoopi that, in order to
kind of recognize herself as part of this holy belonging. She needed to see Black saints and, people who look like her, and also how helpful it is to see these very human, diverse depictions of the disciples of Jesus and say, I can also see myself here. I thought that was a very resonant part of the conversation.
I thought that insight about we are meant not to, in a sense, cast stones and critique other people who might be different from us. Mm-hmm. We're meant to, in a sense, we're judged on how we treat people who are different from us and who are on the outside and who are on the margins. And I found that very insightful. Mm-hmm. And then also her identification and her desire to, be with people like that, right? She was constantly talking about people who are on the margins
and
or left out.
And advocate for them.
Mm-hmm. And I found that very powerful. So, I'm a huge fan of hers, and I met her, I think in earnest during that Vatican visit, and then I had a lunch with her, and I was embarrassed to say that I didn't know much about her Catholic upbringing, and obviously it's a big part of her life, and so I was so happy she was able to share that part of her life with all of our listeners.
Yeah, I think she radiates a kind of joy and self-acceptance that I don't recognize in many people, and I think that should be one of the fruits of the Spirit for us all, right? That we know that God loves us, that we have this intrinsic worth, and that from that flows freedom and joy. And
her humility too. I mean, to be able to say, I screw up and I'm short with people and I do whatever. And it's very human, and it really shows a lot of self-awareness, and it's hard. That's hard for a lot of people to say, look, I'm, as we Jesuits say, a loved sinner. So kind of keeping those two things in balance. But wonderful, wonderful interview.